The fog on Attu Island doesn't move like weather. It crawls across the tundra like something alive, swallowing sound, erasing distance, turning the world into a gray void where nothing exists beyond 10 feet. On May 26, 1943, 200 American soldiers lay pressed against frozen earth on a ridge they couldn't see the top of, pinned by gunfire coming from positions they couldn't locate. Somewhere above them, invisible in the mist, Japanese soldiers waited in holes carved into volcanic rock. The Americans had been stuck here for hours. Men were dying. No one was moving forward. Then one man stood up. Private Joe Martinez walked into that fog alone, carrying a Browning automatic rifle and a decision that would either save everyone or mean nothing at all. What happened in the next 30 minutes would become one of the most extraordinary acts of individual combat in the Pacific War, and one of the least known. To understand why Martinez walked into that fog, you have to understand where the war had brought him. Attu Island sits at the western end of the Aleutian chain, a broken necklace of volcanic islands stretching across the North Pacific toward Japan. It is one of the most hostile environments on Earth. No trees grow there. The wind never stops. The temperature hovers just above freezing even in summer. And the fog is so thick and persistent that pilots called the Aleutians the birthplace of winds. The island is beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. Black volcanic beaches, mountains rising straight from the sea, and a silence so complete it feels like the end of the world. The Japanese invaded Attu on June 7, 1942, 6 months after Pearl Harbor. They came in the fog, landing troops on the northern beaches while Americans on the mainland were still trying to understand what had happened in Hawaii. The invasion force of approximately 1,200 Japanese soldiers overwhelmed the tiny settlement of Attu Village, which was home to fewer than 50 Aleut natives and a single American couple running a weather station. It was the first foreign occupation of American soil since the War of 1812, and it happened so quietly that most Americans never knew it occurred. The press barely covered it. The military classified most details, but the symbolic weight was enormous. Japanese forces now stood on American territory, and they had taken it without a fight. The strategic logic was complex. From Japan's perspective, the Aleutians represented the northern anchor of their defensive perimeter. Bases on Attu and nearby Kiska could threaten American supply lines to the Soviet Union and potentially support operations against Alaska. From the American perspective, tolerating a Japanese presence on U.S. soil was politically impossible, regardless of the island's actual strategic value. So in May 1943, the United States launched Operation Landcrab, the amphibious invasion to retake Attu. It would become one of the forgotten battles of World War II, overshadowed by larger campaigns in the South Pacific, yet it would prove to be one of the most brutal fights American forces encountered anywhere in the war. The 7th Infantry Division landed on Attu on May 11, 1943. They expected to face about 500 Japanese defenders. Intelligence was wrong. There were nearly 2,500 enemy troops dug into the mountains, and they had spent months preparing defenses. The Americans came ashore in a coordinated landing on beaches codenamed Red and Yellow, expecting a rapid advance inland. Instead, they found themselves fighting through terrain that seemed designed to kill them. The ground was frozen tundra over permafrost, covered with a layer of moss and muskeg that could swallow a man to his thighs. There were no roads, no landmarks. The fog reduced visibility to arm's length. Radios failed in the cold and moisture. Artillery sank into the mud. Vehicles became useless. Men carried everything on their backs, and the weight broke them. The cold was unlike anything most soldiers had experienced. This wasn't the sharp, clean cold of winter mountains. This was a wet, penetrating cold that worked through every layer of clothing and settled into bone. Men's hands went numb inside their gloves. Weapons froze. Water in canteens turned to ice. Trench foot became epidemic. Soldiers lost toes, fingers, entire feet to frostbite. The medical evacuation rate from cold injuries exceeded combat casualties in the first week. Men who had trained in the California desert found themselves fighting in an Arctic landscape that felt more like the moon than any battlefield they had imagined. The Japanese defensive strategy was brutally effective. They had constructed a network of positions that exploited every advantage the terrain offered. Spider holes invisible from more than a few feet away. Trenches dug into reverse slopes so American observers couldn't spot them. Machine gun nests positioned with interlocking fields of fire. And most ingeniously, an elaborate system of tunnels connecting bunkers and fighting positions, allowing defenders to move unseen, to appear where they were least expected, to hit American units from angles that should have been secure. The Japanese soldiers on Attu knew they would not be reinforced. They knew they would not be evacuated. They had been ordered to fight to the death, and they accepted that order with a discipline that terrified the Americans who faced them. Private Joe Martinez was 22 years old. He had grown up in Taos, New Mexico, then moved to Colorado where he worked as a sheepherder in the mountains. His world before the war had been vast and empty in its own way. High country, long silences, solitary weeks watching flocks. He knew something about waiting. He knew about cold. And he knew about predators. Mountain lions, coyotes, bears, men with bad intentions. Martinez had dealt with all of them. Sheepherding is often romanticized, but the reality is harder. You spend days alone, responsible for animals that are both valuable and stupid, in country where threats can appear from any direction. You learn to read landscapes. You learn to spot danger in stillness. You learn that sometimes the only way to protect what you're responsible for is to go toward the threat, not away from it. Martinez had been assigned to Company K, 32nd Infantry Regiment, part of the 7th Infantry Division. He was quiet, well-liked, competent. His service record showed nothing exceptional. He did his job. He followed orders. But men who served with him remembered something else. Martinez never seemed surprised by danger. He moved through the chaos of combat with a kind of calm deliberation that suggested he had been in dangerous places before. Sheepherding does that. It teaches you that panic is useless, that observation matters more than action until the moment action becomes necessary, and that when you move with purpose. By May 26th, the battle for Attu had been raging for 15 days. American forces had advanced inland from the landing beaches, fighting for every yard, but progress had been measured in feet. The Japanese had withdrawn from their forward positions into a final defensive line anchored on high ground in the island's interior. The terrain here was even more nightmarish than the beaches. Steep ridges, deep ravines, and everywhere the fog. Company K had been ordered to take a position called Fishhook Ridge, a curved elevation that overlooked Japanese positions further inland. Take the ridge, and artillery observers could direct fire onto enemy concentrations. Fail to take it, and the entire offensive would stall. The company had advanced as far as the base of the ridge before running into the kind of defensive fire that stops attacks cold. Machine guns from positions no one could see. Rifle fire from spider holes that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. Mortar rounds dropping with precision that suggested observers who could see through the fog even if the Americans couldn't. Men went down. Others dove for cover. The attack stalled. Soldiers pressed themselves into the frozen ground, afraid to move, unable to advance, taking casualties from an enemy they couldn't locate. Officers tried to organize another push. Every attempt drew immediate fire and produced more casualties. The situation was becoming desperate. Martinez was lying somewhere in that line, pressed flat like everyone else. His Browning automatic rifle was heavy, 20 pounds loaded, and it dug into the ground beneath him. The bar was a powerful weapon, a magazine-fed automatic rifle that gave a single soldier the firepower of a light machine gun. But it was also temperamental in the cold. Mechanisms froze. Magazines jammed. Martinez had been nursing his weapon for days, keeping it as clean and functional as possible under impossible conditions. Around him, other soldiers were doing the same thing he was, trying to stay alive, waiting for orders, hoping someone above them would figure out a solution. The fog pressed down. Time stretched. Men started to realize they might die here without ever seeing what killed them. What Martinez did next has been documented in after-action reports, witness statements, and Medal of Honor citations, but the internal calculation that led to it remains unknowable. At some point, he stopped waiting for orders. He stood up. He told no one. He simply rose from his position and began walking uphill toward the enemy positions. He moved slowly, deliberately, the bar held ready. His movement was methodical, almost casual, as if he were walking a ridgeline looking for strays. But he was walking toward machine gun fire. He was walking alone. And he was using a technique that seemed to come from some older, more personal understanding of how to deal with threats you cannot see. The principle is simple. If you don't know where the enemy is, make them reveal themselves. Move in the open, but move in a way that makes you difficult to hit, and be ready to fire the instant they show themselves. It is the logic of hunting predators. You can't track a mountain lion by hiding from it. Sometimes you have to expose yourself to make it commit, and when it does, you have to be faster. Martinez began working his way up the slope using fire and movement, but he was doing it alone, which violated every principle of infantry tactics. You're supposed to move in teams, one element firing while another advances. Martinez had no team. He was both the base of fire and the advancing element. He would move forward a few yards, deliberately exposing himself, and when Japanese soldiers fired at him, he would immediately return fire at the source of the muzzle flash, suppressing that position long enough to advance again. The men below watched in disbelief. Some shouted for him to get down. Others simply stared. What Martinez was doing looked like suicide, but it was working. Japanese soldiers in spider holes would rise to fire at this lone American walking toward them, and Martinez would hit them first or suppress them long enough to close distance. He was using the bar the way it was designed to be used, as an assault weapon, but he was doing it with a precision and timing that suggested he had internalized the rhythm of action and reaction, threat and response. Each movement upward exposed another position. Each position he suppressed or destroyed made the next movement possible. It was insanely dangerous, but there was a cold logic to it. The Japanese defenders had been winning by remaining invisible. Martinez was forcing them to become visible, and when they did, he killed them. Witnesses reported that Martinez advanced approximately 75 yards up the slope, systematically eliminating spider holes and forward fighting positions. The exact number of enemy soldiers he killed is uncertain. Reports range from 4 to 7. What matters is the effect. With each position Martinez neutralized, the defensive fire slackening enough for other soldiers to begin moving. Men started following him upward. Not in an organized assault, but in small groups, sensing that the paralysis had broken, that movement was possible again. Martinez kept advancing. He didn't look back. He didn't wait for support. He was focused entirely forward, reading the terrain, anticipating where the next position would be, moving toward it. Near the crest of the ridge, he found what he had been looking for without knowing it existed. A fortified bunker partially concealed by the terrain and fog, with a tunnel entrance connecting it to other defensive positions. This was the anchor of the Japanese defensive line on this part of the ridge. Machine guns positioned to cover the approaches. Clear fields of fire. Thick log and earth construction that could resist anything short of direct artillery hits. This was why Company K had been pinned down. This position dominated the entire slope. Taking it would break the Japanese hold on the ridge. But getting to it required crossing open ground under direct fire from a prepared position. It was the kind of tactical problem that normally requires artillery, air support, or a platoon-sized assault with covering fire. Martinez apparently decided to solve it himself. He closed to within a few yards of the bunker entrance and began firing directly into the opening. The bar cycled round after round, the sound flat and muffled in the fog. He was trying to suppress the defenders inside, keep their heads down long enough to reach the entrance. Japanese soldiers inside returned fire. At this range, the exchange was point-blank, almost intimate. Martinez kept firing and moving. He reached the bunker entrance. What happened in the next seconds is unclear from the historical record. Different accounts describe different specifics. But the essential facts are consistent. Martinez assaulted the bunker position directly. He was hit multiple times. He kept fighting. And when he finally went down, he died at the entrance to the position he had been trying to take, his weapon empty or nearly so, having fought to the absolute limit of what a human body can endure. The men of Company K reached the bunker moments later and finished what Martinez had started. They cleared the position, secured the tunnel entrance, and took the ridge crest. The Japanese defensive line here had collapsed, not because of superior numbers or firepower, but because one soldier had forced it to reveal itself and then destroyed it piece by piece. The cost was everything Martinez had, but the immediate tactical result was clear. Company K took Fish Hook Ridge. American forces could now bring observed artillery fire onto Japanese positions further inland. The offensive, which had been stalling, regained momentum. In the calculus of military operations, Martinez's action was a success. A single soldier's initiative had broken a defensive line and changed the trajectory of the battle. In the calculus of individual life, it was a young man dying in fog and mud 4,000 miles from home, fighting for terrain that most Americans couldn't find on a map. The battle for Attu continued for another 4 days. The Japanese defenders, recognizing that their position had become untenable, launched a final banzai charge on the night of May 29th, a desperate, suicidal assault that resulted in savage hand-to-hand fighting and ended with the near-total destruction of the Japanese garrison. Of the approximately 2,500 Japanese soldiers on Attu, only 28 were captured alive. The rest died fighting or took their own lives. American casualties were severe: 549 killed in action, 1,148 wounded, and more than 1,200 evacuated for cold weather injuries, trench foot, and disease. The casualty rate relative to the size of the force engaged made Attu one of the costliest battles in the Pacific theater. For every 100 American soldiers who landed on Attu, 71 became casualties. The only comparable casualty rate in the Pacific would be Iwo Jima, 2 years later. The strategic value of retaking Attu was always debatable. The island had no port, no significant resources, and was so remote that supplying it cost more than any possible benefit it provided. But the symbolic value was enormous. American forces had retaken American soil. The myth of Japanese invincibility, already cracking after Midway and Guadalcanal, sustained another blow. And critically, the lessons learned on Attu, about cold weather warfare, amphibious assaults against prepared defenses, and the fanatical determination of Japanese soldiers, would inform American planning for every subsequent island campaign. Attu was a brutal education, paid for in blood and frozen limbs, but it taught the U.S. military how to fight the war it was about to wage across the Pacific. Private Joe P. Martinez was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration. The citation reads in part, "When his platoon was pinned down by hostile fire from a snow-covered ridge, Private Martinez, on his own initiative, advanced alone toward the enemy position. Firing his automatic rifle from the hip, he moved forward through furious hostile fire and cleared the way for his platoon to advance, and then continued his attack against a second hostile position, from which the enemy had opened heavy fire. The language is formal, bureaucratic, military. It reduces 30 minutes of individual combat to a few sentences. Cannot capture what it felt like to stand up in that fog. It cannot explain what Martinez was thinking when he decided to walk toward machine gun fire alone. Cannot convey the fear, the calculation, the moment of decision when he chose to move while everyone else chose to wait. His body was recovered and initially buried on Attu. Later, he was reinterred at Santa Fe National Cemetery in New Mexico, not far from where he grew up. There is a memorial stone there with his name, rank, and the Medal of Honor inscription. A few people visit each year. Most are military history enthusiasts or descendants of soldiers who fought in the Aleutians. The vast majority of Americans have never heard of Joe Martinez or the Battle of Attu. The Aleutian campaign has been called the Forgotten War of World War II, overshadowed by larger battles in Europe and the South Pacific. But those who fought there never forgot. Veterans of Attu remembered the cold, the fog, and the particular horror of fighting an enemy who seemed to materialize out of the ground itself. There is something instructive in Martinez's story that extends beyond the immediate tactical outcome. He was not a career soldier. He had no advanced training in infantry tactics. His Medal of Honor citation describes him as acting on his own initiative, which is military language for disobeying the fundamental rule of infantry combat: never advance alone. What he did was technically wrong. It violated doctrine. It was the kind of action that, had it failed, would have been written up as a cautionary example of individual recklessness. But it succeeded, And that success reveals something uncomfortable about war and leadership and the gap between what manuals say should work and what actually works when men are dying and time is running out. Martinez made a decision that no officer would have ordered and no manual would have recommended, but he made it from a lifetime of experience that the Army had not given him. Sheepherding in the high country teaches situational awareness, threat assessment, and the ability to act decisively in isolation. Those skills transferred to a battlefield in ways that could not have been predicted or trained. The U.S. military in 1943 was still learning how to fight the kind of war it was in, and sometimes that learning came from soldiers who brought skills from civilian lives that happened to be relevant in ways no one had anticipated. Martinez's contribution to the battle for Attu was rooted in something older than modern warfare. The knowledge of how to deal with predators you cannot see and the willingness to expose yourself to danger in order to protect others. It is worth considering what would have happened if Martinez had not acted. Company K was pinned, taking casualties, unable to advance. Officers were trying to organize a coordinated assault, but coordination requires time, and time costs lives. Every minute men stayed pinned on that slope. Japanese observers were adjusting fire and machine gunners were finding new targets. The situation was deteriorating. Eventually, someone would have ordered a platoon-level assault with covering fire, and more men would have died trying to take that ridge than actually did. Or the attack might have been called off, the company withdrawn, and the offensive would have stalled for days while commanders figured out another approach. Martinez didn't prevent all those deaths. He changed the equation by creating an unexpected solution to an apparently insoluble problem. The cost was his life. The benefit was that fewer other men died than would have otherwise. There is no satisfying moral calculus for this. One life against many is the utilitarian answer, but Martinez didn't do the math before he stood up. He saw a problem. He had a tool that might solve it. He used the tool. The fact that the tool was his own body, his own willingness to die, is what makes the action remarkable and terrible at the same time. War demands this kind of sacrifice constantly, from soldiers on every side, in every conflict. Most of those sacrifices go unrecorded. Most produce no significant result. Martinez's action happened to occur at the right place and right time to make a measurable difference, and it happened to be witnessed by enough people to become part of the official record, but there were undoubtedly other soldiers on Attu and every other battlefield who did similar things that no one saw or survived to report. The Japanese soldiers who defended Attu were also acting from a set of principles that demanded absolute sacrifice. They had been ordered to hold the island, and they held it until annihilation. Their defensive positions were expertly constructed. Their fields of fire were perfectly calculated. Their discipline under impossible conditions was remarkable. They fought knowing they would receive no reinforcements, no resupply, no evacuation. They fought because their orders and their culture demanded they fight, and when fighting became impossible, most chose death over surrender. There is no valor in pretending that enemy soldiers were somehow less human or less brave than Allied soldiers. The men Martinez fought against on that ridge were professionals doing their jobs under extreme conditions, just as he was. The tragedy of Attu is not that Americans defeated Japanese forces, but that thousands of men on both sides died fighting for a frozen island that had no real strategic value to either nation. The fog on Attu never lifts for long. Weather patterns in the Aleutians produce near-constant cloud cover and mist. Visibility remains poor most of the year. The island is still uninhabited. There is a Coast Guard station and some military facilities, but no permanent civilian population. The battlefield itself is slowly being reclaimed by tundra and time. Rusted equipment corrodes into the soil. Shell craters fill with water and moss. The trenches and bunkers are collapsing. In another generation, the physical evidence of what happened there will be nearly invisible. Only the military cemeteries remain maintained, and even those are rarely visited. Attu is too remote, too difficult to reach, and the war it represents is too far in the past for most people to remember or care about. But memory has its own geography. The men who fought on Attu carried it with them for the rest of their lives. They remembered the cold. They remembered the fog. They remembered watching friends die for terrain that didn't matter. And some of them remembered watching Joe Martinez stand up and walk alone toward enemy fire, doing something no one else thought possible, breaking a stalemate through sheer individual will and skill. Those memories have mostly died now. The last veterans of the Aleutian campaign are gone or nearly gone. Their stories pass into the written record, the archived documents, the Medal of Honor citations that preserve actions without preserving the men who performed them. There is something irreducible about Martinez's action that resists analysis. You can document what he did. You can explain the tactical situation. You can describe the terrain and the weapons and the outcome. But the decision itself, the moment when he chose to stand and move while others stayed down, that moment belongs only to him. It was made in fog under fire by a 22-year-old sheepherder from Colorado who found himself on a volcanic island in the North Pacific fighting a war he probably didn't fully understand for reasons that probably didn't make complete sense to him. He did what seemed necessary. He used skills he had learned in a completely different context to solve a military problem. And he died doing it. The question of why remains unanswerable. Why did Martinez act when others didn't? Was it courage? Desperation? Some combination of training and instinct? A sheepherder's understanding that predators must be confronted? Or simply the random fact that he happened to be the man in the right place with the right skills and the right weapon at the right moment? Military awards and historical narratives impose meaning on actions after the fact, but the actions themselves occur in chaos, in incomplete information, in the space between fear and necessity where decisions get made for reasons that even the person making them might not be able to articulate. What we can say is that Martinez's action mattered. It broke a stalemate. It saved lives. It contributed to an American victory in a battle that, however obscure and strategically questionable, was part of the larger war effort. His Medal of Honor was earned. His name is recorded. And the story of what he did on Fishhook Ridge on May 26, 1943, stands as an example of individual initiative, tactical improvisation, and the kind of selfless courage that war sometimes demands and rarely rewards with survival. The story also stands as a reminder that war is fundamentally about individuals making impossible choices in terrible circumstances. The grand strategies, the theater-level operations, the national objectives, all of those matter in the historical accounting. But on the ground, war is always personal. It is always about specific human beings in specific moments deciding whether to advance or retreat, to fire or hold fire, to risk death or accept paralysis. Martinez chose to advance. He chose to fight. He chose to sacrifice himself so that others might survive. That choice, made in fog on a forgotten island in a forgotten campaign, is the essence of what the Medal of Honor is meant to recognize. Extraordinary heroism in circumstances where survival should have been impossible and action seemed futile. The fog on Attu rolls in every day, just as it did in 1943. The island is quiet now. The only sounds are wind and waves and the occasional cry of seabirds. The bunkers Martinez assaulted are collapsed and overgrown. The ridge where he died has no marker. But the action itself remains, preserved in military records and Medal of Honor citations and the fading memories of a generation that fought a war most people have forgotten. Joe Martinez walked into fog toward invisible enemies and never walked back out. What he did there, alone on a frozen slope 4,000 miles from home, changed the course of a battle and demonstrated what one person, properly skilled and sufficiently determined, can accomplish even in the worst circumstances imaginable. If you found this story worth your time, I'd be grateful if you would subscribe to the channel and consider leaving a like on this video. History is full of stories like Martinez's, acts of extraordinary courage in forgotten battles fought by people whose names have been lost to time. What do you think drives someone to make the kind of decision Martinez made? Is it training, personality, circumstance, or something else entirely? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening.